Yo guys, welcome back for another Palworld video. So today I want to talk to you guys a little bit about status effects and why realistically many of these status effects and the pals that go along with those status effects aren't really worth using, or at the very least probably don't work the way many people think that they do. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. I was originally making a team that was going to focus on the blind status effect. Now, it wasn't until later that I found out the blind status effect is probably the worst status effect in the entire game. We'll go over more of that later. But I've realized that it wasn't being procced enough where it felt like it was actually worth it. NANI? Keep in mind, the current team that I was using was kind of using two characters for this in particular. I was using Venusa to help apply the blind debuff, and then I was also using another pal that was giving me a damage bonus when enemies were blinded. But again, I noticed that there wasn't enough uptime for blind for it to really feel like it was even doing anything. Okay, so how do these status afflictions actually work? Well, we don't actually know 100%, but we can kind of extrapolate from some of the information that I'm going to show later in the video. But the overarching idea is that essentially there is some threshold, some number that when that number is hit for an aggregate value of a specific type of debuff, then the debuff is applied. We're going to use an example of us inflicting 6 blind on each of our attacks. Now, when that blind value hits, like, let's say 100 or 150 or 200, then the actual blind debuff is going to apply. And then at that point, it will increase the number that is required to apply the blind debuff once again. So when it says here in Venusa's partner skill that your attacks apply blind 6, that means 6 levels of blind. And again, you need hundreds or maybe even thousands at some point stacks of this to actually proc it. But the thing that really sucks about this for many of the elements and status debuffs is that when you do proc blind using something like this, or when you're using skills or whatever, the next time to proc blind is actually going to take significantly longer. And I'm not kidding when I say this kind of feels like it has exponential growth at sometimes. So I'll go ahead and put the same video I'm referencing here, but it's going to be sped up. So keep an eye on the boss timer and then you'll get a better feel for the numbers we're talking about. So it took about 21 bullets for the first application that happened around 4 minutes and 22 seconds, 40 bullets for the second application, 65 bullets for the third application, 138 bullets for the fourth application, 272 bullets for the fifth application, and 549 bullets for the sixth application. The thing is it gets significantly slower after the third application. You can see the timing again, 422, 416, 405. So that's 3 applications of blind that happened in the first 30 seconds of me actually shooting at the boss. And then after that, it gets significantly slower. We see 30-second dip between the third and the fourth application, 45-second dip between the fourth and the fifth application, and then between the fifth and the sixth application, almost a 2-minute difference. That is a massive amount of time that you are not having blind on the enemy or any status debuff if you're using this kind of setup. Again, keep in mind, we're using 2 different pals for this setup. And at this point, we're only going to have 6 applications over the course of a 4.5-minute fight. I did actually use the first 30 seconds to fight the mobs, for example. The second part of this is actually going to be the duration of these different effects. And when we're looking at damage and uptime, that is naturally going to be very, very important. So now that we know we're going to get about 6 applications roughly within a 5-minute fight, if the duration is long enough, maybe there is value to be had here. However, when it comes to blind in particular, blind only lasts about 4 seconds. Now, when it's going to my testing, what I found is that poison lasts the longest by far at 18 seconds. Burn lasts 14 seconds. Ivy, mud, electrify, soak all last 10 seconds. Blind lasts about 4 seconds, and then freeze lasts about 3 seconds. The point being is, especially when it comes to blind, having 6 applications at 4 seconds long means 24 seconds is covered out of the 4.5-minute fight that we had. That is not very much uptime and is definitely not worth having 2 pals dedicated to getting this job done. When it comes to something like Ivy Vines or like Soak, for example, those do get a little bit better with about a minute out of a 4.5 minute fight, so that's not terrible uptime, but again, it's not really great. Now, this does get modified for sure if you have a pal that is also applying those debuffs, so that's something to consider as well. That will help significantly with getting their attacks, and we'll go over that in a moment too. But I just wanted to specifically point this out because I know a lot of people are saying to use the pals that inflict these status debuffs, and I generally just don't think it's worth it. Now, on the flip side, if you know that you're just going to melt the boss in the first minute, it kind of doesn't really matter, right? The application of the debuff doesn't really slow down until after, the first 30 seconds or so of the fight, as you saw before. So if you're going to do it in the first minute, you're going to have pretty decent uptime, especially with some of those longer lasting debuffs. But if you're fighting something like one of the ultra raid bosses and you're expecting to fight them for potentially the full 10 minutes, this information is going to be a lot more important because you're not going to be getting nearly as many of those status inflictions as you might have assumed before, myself included. I thought I'd be able to proc blind significantly more often than what I was actually able to do, especially given the low duration of it. And the way that it seems to work out is that if you already have applied the debuff, you can already start building the new stacks. Now, for the test that I showed, I tried not to do that, but in a few instances, I accidentally shot a few additional bullets, which I did feel like made a difference in how fast I could apply the next debuff. So if you're using something like Poison, or if you're using something like Burn, which has a much longer duration, you're gonna have a lot more opportunity to start stacking the next debuff. So you might even have scenarios where there's not a lot of downtime in those first few applications at all. But there will come a point in the boss fight, as you saw, where it becomes significantly harder, and needing 3200 aggregate value to start the next burn or the next debuff is still a lot of value to be applied. Now, when it comes to pals, how are they going to be helping in this process? Well, if you look at a particular skill, you'll see like Dark Wisp here has a aggregate blind value of 100, which means you can basically think of a pal skill as anywhere between 16 and 17 bullets in our previous example. This aggregate value seems to be just an additional way that you can add this value up on the current debuff. And so this will give you 100 stacks or 100 value towards whatever that current threshold actually is. So the aggregate value does seem like it's pretty important for having the pals help actually with those status debuffs. However, what you'll find is that the pals don't do it either. There is a certain amount where it just becomes too daunting of a task where you can't just inflict that much aggregate. You can see these other abilities here all have different values for aggregate and how much they're going to apply. And I believe 102 roughly is about the highest that you'll see on a traditional skill. However, there is one exception to the rule. I have not been able to find any other skill in the game other than this one. Poison Fog aggregate 9,999. This is the only skill that I have seen where every single time this skill is used, it will proc poison. And because we can actually breed it into other pals from Venusa here, we have the ability to build a 100% uptime poison build, which does mean that in that case, you can use one of those pals that gives you the 65% damage when the enemy has a status debuff, and you don't ever have to worry about it. The only problem would be if the pal misses the ability or something like that. And unfortunately, what does all this mean? Well, it means Roje 07, friend, because you might be the most worthless pal in the game. There's so many other buffs that you could benefit from. This just isn't good enough. And also, conversely, unless you're doing a build where she can poison using Poison Fog, or if you're breeding her specifically to get Poison Fog on a good pal, you probably never will be using Venusa either. So 07, it's been nice knowing you, but honestly, I think there's so many other pals that you would want to breed this onto that work so much better. Like, for example, the star of the show here is Prickster, and the fact that you can breed that same ability onto Prickster, and he's the one that gives you the bonus damage. And if you give him abilities like Impatient and Serenity, he can have 100% uptime on poison for the entire duration of the fight if you so choose. It also means that whenever your pals are ready to burst, you can go ahead and just push him out there to poison the enemy and then recall him and put your pal out that's going to be doing all the damage. Vice versa, if you're just going to be doing the damage yourself, you could just run him really tanky and then just continue shooting the boss while it's just keeping poison on 100% of the time. Well, thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you guys have any comments down below, feel free to comment, like the video down below if you guys like the video. If you guys have any questions or anything about Palworld that you are interested in, hit me up down there. I'm always down to talk to you guys about stuff, like always. And subscribe to the channel if you want to see more stuff like this. Really soon, we're going to be having out a build guide for like the characters and teams that I'm using. And so stay tuned for that. So I'll catch you guys later. Have a good one, guys. Peace.